Today we're going to be looking at the important elements that you're going to want to make sure that you include in your talk. And so you're going to be using this slide, which identifies each of the four parts that we're going to include. And then it gives you a space for you to write your description of that element. And then also a space for you to start thinking about what that element is going to look like in your talk specifically. So first we're going to look at each one of the items in this table, and then we'll come back to this slide and talk about how you're going to use it to your benefit. So first we have our hook. This should sound really familiar to you because we talk about this all the time when we think about writing in various forms. We think about hooking our reader when we're writing a narrative. We think about hooking our reader when we write an informational piece or a persuasive piece. And this is just like that. We want to engage our audience from the very, very beginning. So we want to think about how we're going to do that. How are we going to loop our audience in and get them listening and connected so that they continue to listen all the way through our talk? So some questions you're going to ask yourself are, how will you hook your audience? How will you draw them in? How do you do this in your writing? Because we're going to pull our writing skills into this. Just a few that come to mind. Some of you like to set a scene for your readers. That can work here too. Some of us like to start our writing with a question. You can do that in your talk as well. So I want you to go back and think about how those strategies we use to hook our readers in our writing can be applied to hooking our audience in our talk. The next element is perspective. We are going to operate under the assumption that audiences connect to ideas, to things that are not living, when they feel connected first to the person who is speaking, to the person who is sharing those ideas. So when you try to communicate a message to your audience, it is going to be very important that they first connect with you. And so to do that, we want to ask ourselves, how will we connect with our audience? What will we do to show our perspective, to have them feel like they could actually be walking in our shoes as we tell our story? This is the part where we want to make sure that we infuse things that are personal. I know we talked earlier about how can we make this talk a talk that only you could share. And that's oftentimes where that personal story comes in. People connect to story and oftentimes are seeking to find themselves within the story that you're telling. So your perspective being shared through your talk is going to be incredibly important, because it's going to be the key to helping your audience hear your great idea. Tension is going to be very important. Any of us can get up and give a talk, but great talks, they tell us a story of something that we learned or that the speaker learned, but they tell the journey to that discovery. So if you think back to the talks that you've listened to, and as we go forward, I want you to listen for the tension, because that is the part where the speaker shares their struggle, okay? They share the overcoming of the problem, the facing of the problem. So things you're gonna wanna ask yourself, did you run into a problem that you couldn't solve? Make sure that you share that. Did you have an encounter that you couldn't make sense of? Make sure you share that. Make sure that you tell us so that we feel the same tension that you felt in the moment. And it's really, it's kind of funny. This kind of goes against, I guess, in some ways, what our culture communicates to us about needing to project that everything is great and we have no problems and You know, we thought of something brilliant and we executed something brilliant and we moved forward. But actually, the best stories talk about the failures or the struggle. So sharing the tension is going to be really, really, really important in enriching the talk that you share. And finally, your talk is going to have I almost said conclusion, which is really what it is, a closing or a conclusion. This is where you're going to recap for your audience the journey that you have taken them on. This is where you connect the dots for them so that they fully understand the main idea of your talk. We want our audience to feel satisfied with our ending. So the way we close will also be important. So let's come back to our slide now. Now that you've heard me talk about each one of these parts, feel free to re-listen to the video if that is helpful to you. I've also included still shots of these anchor charts in this post. So you're going to want to put in your own words a description of each: hook, perspective, tension, and closing. And then over in the notes for my talk column, I want you to start jotting down some ideas you have for each of those parts. So for example, for hook, I want you to put a couple different ways you might begin to hook your audience at the beginning of your talk. I want you to think of this slide as is really part of your pre-writing, because the more we can start thinking of these parts, the easier your talk is going to come in the end. So let's make sure, let's see. Okay, so you've got hook, and then you're gonna go, okay, how am I gonna share my perspective? You're gonna put that there. And then you're gonna say, how am I gonna share my tension? Or how might I close my talk? Add all of those pieces into the notes part of your slide.